When it comes to baking and cooking, sugar seems like one of the simplest ingredients in the kitchen. After all, sugar is sugar, right? Whether it's sprinkled into coffee, mixed into cake batter, or dusted over desserts, it all comes from the same source. But if you've ever looked at a recipe and noticed it specifically calls for either powdered sugar or granulated sugar, you might have wondered why. If they're both sugar, what difference does it make? So today, we're going to find out what's the real difference between powdered sugar and granulated sugar. Right here on History of Food. The answer is that powdered sugar and granulated sugar may start from the same ingredient, but they behave very differently. Their texture, production process, and role in recipes can dramatically affect the final result. Understanding the difference can mean the difference between a smooth frosting and a grainy one, or between a perfectly baked cookie and a disappointing batch. Let's start with granulated sugar, the type most people are familiar with. This is the standard white sugar found in nearly every kitchen. It consists of medium-sized crystals produced from either sugarcane or sugar beets. After the sugar is extracted, purified, and crystallized, it is dried and packaged into the familiar form we use every day. What makes granulated sugar special is its crystal structure. Those tiny crystals don't just add sweetness. They also affect texture, moisture, and even the chemistry of baked goods. When butter and granulated sugar are creamed together for cookies or cakes, the sugar crystals create tiny air pockets. These pockets help trap air, contributing to a lighter texture and better rise during baking. In many recipes, sugar acts almost like a structural ingredient rather than just a sweetener. Granulated sugar is also surprisingly versatile. It can be dissolved into beverages, transformed into syrups, caramelized into golden sauces, or used to create crunchy textures. When heated to around 170 degrees Celsius, sugar begins to caramelize, producing hundreds of new flavor compounds. That's why caramel has such a rich, complex taste compared to plain sugar. Now let's look at powdered sugar. At first glance, it appears completely different. Instead of visible crystals, powdered sugar looks like a fine white powder, almost like flour. That's because it is essentially granulated sugar that has been ground into extremely tiny particles. But there's another important detail. Most commercial powdered sugar contains a small amount of anti-caking agent, usually cornstarch. This typically makes up about 3 to 5% of the product. The cornstarch prevents the fine sugar particles from clumping together when exposed to moisture. Without it, powdered sugar would quickly form hard lumps in the package. The extremely fine texture of powdered sugar gives it unique properties. Because the particles are so small, they dissolve almost instantly. This makes powdered sugar ideal for recipes that require a perfectly smooth texture. Frostings, glazes, icings, whipped cream, and dessert toppings often rely on powdered sugar because it blends effortlessly without leaving gritty crystals behind. Think about the silky frosting on a birthday cake. If it were made with ordinary granulated sugar, you would likely feel tiny sugar crystals every time you took a bite. Powdered sugar eliminates that problem, creating the smooth mouthfeel people expect. The difference in texture becomes even more obvious when you compare how the two sugars behave in recipes. Granulated sugar adds structure and can create crispness. Powdered sugar tends to produce softer, more delicate results. This is why some cookie recipes specifically use powdered sugar instead of granulated sugar. For example, traditional shortbread cookies and Mexican wedding cookies often call for powdered sugar. Because the sugar particles are so fine, they interfere less with gluten formation and create a tender, melt-in-your-mouth texture. Granulated sugar, on the other hand, often produces cookies with a slightly crispier edge and chewier center. One of the most common baking mistakes is assuming the two sugars can always be substituted for each other. Technically, both provide sweetness, but they don't perform the same functions. Replacing granulated sugar with powdered sugar can change the texture, density, and moisture balance of a recipe. The added cornstarch can also affect the final product, especially in delicate baked goods. Likewise, substituting granulated sugar for powdered sugar in frosting is usually a recipe for disappointment. Even after vigorous mixing, the larger crystals often remain partially undissolved, resulting in a grainy texture that lacks the smooth finish bakers want. Another fascinating difference is how the two sugars occupy space. Because powdered sugar contains much more air between its tiny particles, a cup of powdered sugar weighs significantly less than a cup of granulated sugar. This is why professional bakers often prefer weighing ingredients rather than measuring by volume. Two cups may look identical in size, but their actual sugar content can be very different. There is also a visual element to consider. Powdered sugar has become one of the most recognizable finishing touches in the dessert world. A light dusting can transform a simple cake, brownie, or pastry into something that looks elegant and professionally made. Beyond sweetness, it serves as decoration, creating contrast and visual appeal. So, which sugar is better? The truth is that neither one is superior. They simply serve different purposes. Granulated sugar is the workhorse of baking and cooking, providing structure, texture, and versatility. Powdered sugar specializes in smoothness, delicate textures, and beautiful finishes. Each plays a unique role that the other cannot fully replace. The next time you see both sitting side by side in a grocery store, you'll know they are much more than different forms of the same ingredient. One crystal helps cookies rise, caramel turns golden, and cakes achieve their structure. The other creates silky frostings, delicate pastries, and that iconic snowy dusting on desserts. They may come from the same source, but in the kitchen, powdered sugar and granulated sugar are two very different tools, and knowing when to use each one can make all the difference. If you have suggestions for our next video, feel free to share them in the comments below. Thank you for watching.